titled Lessons on Lean Collaborations in Health, Energy, and Talent Markets. I want to introduce our panel. Our moderator, Aneesh Chopra, is the co-founder and EVP of Hunch Analytics, a hatchery incubating ideas that improve the productivity of health and education markets, including Nav Health, an open data intelligence service. From 2009 to 2012, he served as the first U.S. Chief Technology Officer with a focus on better public-private collaboration, as described in his 2014 book, Innovative State, How New Technologies Can Transform Government. He has a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School and a bachelor's degree from the Johns Hopkins University in 1994. And his two guests on stage here today, Karen Austin is the Senior Vice President of Information Technology and CIO for Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Her area of focus is information technology, where she's leading the evaluation of every aspect of the group's business. Prior to this role, she held several executive level positions at Kmart Corporation and Sears Holding Corporation. She has a bachelor's degree in computer science from Tri-State University in Angola, Indiana. And we're also joined by Leanne Levensaler, who is a senior vice president at Workday and is responsible for the direction and strategy of Workday's applications. Prior to joining the company in 2009, Leanne was principal analyst and director of talent management research at Burson and Associates. She has a master's degree in human resource development from Georgia State University and a bachelor's degree in education from Clemson University. And so, here we go.
Okay, hi everybody. All right, so before we get started, let's do a quick understanding of the areas of interest. Tell me if you guys are interested in the health side of the conversation we're going to have. We've got a few of the healthcare folks. How about the energy folks? How many folks are interested in the energy side? Very good. And how about our talent and skills piece of the economy? Okay, good number of that. Okay, good. So what we're going to do today is have a conversation about a new application of the lean startup approach in areas that cross boundaries. So obviously you'll see case studies throughout the conference about organizations big and small incorporating lean startup principles in their product development capability. But this session will focus a little bit about how organizations collaborate across not just their within others in their peer group, but also increasingly with the public sector. And so the conversation here is can and has it been done? The answer to that is yes. How has it been done? And might there be lessons learned that would apply not just in these sectors, but even in others that have the similar characteristics? What I'm going to do up front is spend about 5 to 10 minutes framing the conversation to set the stage. And then I'm going to have a conversation first with Karen to talk about the energy story, and then with Leanne to talk about what we were doing together in the talent markets. And I'll wrap with a conversation about what's happened in health. And then we can have a conversation with those of you that would like to engage in any specific questions or conversations. All right? I will start with the boss. I wanted to get the conversation going based on how I became acquainted with the lean startup methodology. And it had to do with the piece of paper that President Obama is holding in his hand. It is, or at the time, this was May of 2012, was the mortgage disclosure form that had been built by the American people over the previous 8 months or so. And the story of how that came to be begins with a dinner here in San Francisco when, in my capacity as Chief Technology Officer, one of my deputies, Eugene, and I visited Tim O'Reilly and Eric Rees and a variety of other leaders in the community to ask them for feedback on the latest agency in the federal government, the one that was in many ways deemed to be a startup. When the president signed the Dodd-Frank financial reform legislation into law, he ushered in the creation of an agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This particular agency was charged with delivering a brand new consumer service to intake from the American people complaints about consumer products and to consider whether or not patterns of those complaints warranted further regulatory intervention. In other words, get a signal from the community and to react in order to create policies that would make the system work better for the American people. In addition to the listening process, there was also a predetermined set of services that were already deemed to be problematic. If you recall, during the financial crisis, we had a pretty rough go of it with mortgages. Many American consumers struggled with understanding the terms and conditions of the loans that they had already signed up for. So there was no need to wait for feedback about the difficulty of understanding loan terms. So the Congress, the administration, basically front-loaded that deliverable. Let's create for the American people an actual service that gives them their a more simplified consumer protection in the form of a new mortgage disclosure form. In traditional Washington, this would be the work of lobbyists and big bang deliverables, meaning the insiders who knew how to design said forms would be consulting with the regulators. They'd have meetings in Washington. Very few people would participate in these processes, even though they would be technically open to the public. They wouldn't really engage a lot of folks. And then with like Moses tablets, the administration would release, "Herein lies the new way. We're going to protect you, the American people, from these confusing mortgage products." Well, at the dinner, Eric informed me of the model of the lean startup and the degree to which we should hypothesis test. And that it made more sense to iterate with the American people rather than have a big bang moment, following many, many months or years of insider baseball. So, taking his advice to heart, we put up a website, Know Before You Owe. And we invited the American people over the course of 3 months to provide commentary on what features of forms, Form A, Form B, C, D, E, multiple rounds of forms were tested to see what was appealing, what was problematic, and the feedback ultimately resulted in 30,000 comments from the American people. And what was exciting about this is that President Obama was able to stand up before the American people holding up the form built by the American people. And here's an interesting twist of fate. Because the Consumer Bureau was caught up in a bit of a political issue, there absolutely was no regulatory authority. Basically, Congress would not approve a formal director of the agency, and then by law was not able to promulgate new regulations because it needed to have an official agency head. So Congress dragged its feet to confirm a regulatory head. So the president, in this case, stood up to present to the American people a form that had not yet even officially gone through a lobbying process or a registration process or regulatory process, only because of shenanigans in Washington. But the American people delivered. And that ethos is what still operates, the Consumer Protection Bureau still operates with that ethos. The president unveiled a strategy for American innovation back in 2009. It's when he first described the role of the chief technology officer and the assignment to essentially close the innovation gap between how the public and private sectors would operate. And that, like any living document, is updated time and again. And the most recent version was published just about a month ago. And you can see in this framework that the American people are meant to have a role in implementing a lot of these regulations or challenges in health, energy, education, space, any one of these domains where there's a heavy public influence. This notion that the American people should help co-create the market in many ways is now scaling up, not only because of the experience we had at the Consumer Protection Bureau, but this philosophy that the president had promulgated. And it's important to note that it's now enshrined in the president's strategy, explicit references to lean startup methodology to characterize how the public sector would engage in delivering a more innovative government for the American people. So to wrap this initial upfront setting and to set the stage for the discussion, I will invoke, because this is a bipartisan discussion, the spirit of a president of yesteryear, who I will credit for the nature of this conversation we're going to have. It was a president by the name of Herbert Hoover. Now, we might laugh because Herbert Hoover may not be the most well-regarded president in history, but when Herbert Hoover was Secretary of Commerce after World War I, he introduced to the world a new role of government to engage in commercial market activity. And it was a role that he referred to as the Associative State. the Associative State was a government that largely played the role of convener. Hoover asked industries to form groups, aviation industry, manufacturing industry, bicycling industry, you name it, and that together they should identify a number of common challenges. You might think of them today as pre-competitive R&D, or as we're going to get to in a few minutes, this notion of standards and how the industry might better collaborate, lowering barriers to entry and fostering greater innovation. Hoover specifically faced the conundrum that after World War I, America's leadership position in aircraft manufacturing was in jeopardy. After the buildup of the purchasing of aircraft for the war came to an end, we didn't have a government subsidy program to prop up the aircraft production system. In Europe, they did. And so many countries were betting heavy that this was an industry of the future, that we're going to subsidize it. And the industry came running to the president, the Secretary of Commerce at the time, and said, bail us out effectively. To which he responded, I'm not going to bail you out, but what I will do is I will fund areas of common interest, and we will work together on standards. And so there were two very clear engineering problems in their day. One, they didn't know how to manage engine cowlings, and they didn't know how to design airfoils, the wings. They couldn't quite get those pieces working. So the industry came together with the predecessor to NASA and actually worked on these common engineering tasks. And the output was to be made freely available to anyone for reuse. The two most popular aircraft of that era, the DC-3 and the Boeing 247, relied on those key collaborations for their product development. And they were wildly successful. So the spirit of that industry collaboration lives in the modern era with three of the case studies we're going to highlight today. The first is how we collaborated with the utility sector to standardize how consumers can access their energy usage data as the industry upgrades the infrastructure to a smart grid. Second, the notion that as we look at our labor market, we're not optimizing the ability for us to figure out exactly where the skills are in our society, the talent, and what's in demand. Our inability to match in a perfect world exactly what job in this economy was I put on this earth to perform. And so to demonstrate what was possible, we ran a prototype to apply this line of thinking with veterans who have suffered so greatly returning home from the wars, facing a much more complicated recruitment environment. And then last but not least, moving the healthcare industry from sort of a legacy technical architecture to RESTful APIs, to a more open system where patients at the center can connect and reuse their data, led to the creation of a collaboration called the Argonaut Project. We're going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes on each of these and then engage you with conversation. So first up, Karen Austin, welcome to the family and stage. Say hi to Karen Austin, everybody. Hi, Karen. Karen, before we dive into the specifics of Green Button Connect, I know we had the bio at the outset, but just tell us your journey from commerce or retail to utility may not be the most obvious path. Give us a little bit of your context. What motivated you to get into the retail industry? And then we'll dive into the specifics here.
Sure. Get over the mic.
And I have the mic here.
Is it on? Okay. Interesting. I spent 28 years in retail between Kmart and Sears Holdings. I got the call for this utility position in San Francisco. And my first reaction was, a utility? It must be so bureaucratic. And at the time we were empty nesters, so my husband said, it's San Francisco, just go on the effing interview. So I did. And fell in love with the company and the opportunity to create the digital utility as well as Paradise, certainly here. And it wasn't long after I started that Aneesh called me on a Friday afternoon and said, Karen, I have this great idea. How about we give the customers more information about their energy utilization? And I'm like, oh my God, I love that idea. We should definitely do that. So we quickly pulled together the other California utilities, San Diego Gas and Electric and Southern Cal Edison, with a small group from NIST for standards, and created, Aneesh flew out, and in a half-a-day meeting, we created a standard record format for energy usage from the smart meters, which we then produced the solution within 90 days. So that whole thing about, oh my God, a utility must be so bureaucratic, was not so bureaucratic, and we actually deployed it within 90 days.
So let's peel back this story and let's get into the mechanics of it a little bit.
Sure.
So prior to the discussion of the call, obviously we were talking about this specific project. How was the idea of consumer participation with their energy usage data going internally? Was it a project? Was it a high priority project? Was it a funded initiative just on the back burner? Give us some situational awareness about how the end result, if you look back, where it fit in the queue.
It wasn't high in the priority, and the other thing I learned as the new CIO at PG&E, because I am part of Unite, which is 23 utility CIOs across the country. We meet twice a year, and the irony is almost all of them had been called by Aneesh and said, no, let's not do that. And I, coming from retail, said, of course we want to serve our customers, let's give them the information. So I think the passion about serving the customer from my retail background certainly helped drive it forward, with certainly Aneesh's passion.
Well, and we'll get to that, but the specifics of the, first of all, to set the stage, when we had the conversation about whether or not we could initiate such a collaboration, just imagine in your mind a large boardroom where 3 utility CIOs from the largest utilities in California, myself, a couple folks from the government, and a dozen lawyers.
Yes.
Can you just describe what, roughly speaking, what's that like?
Yes. And all
Basically,
the reasons
doctors
why
know.
we can't do it.
Doctors know.
Exactly.
And just to set the stage about how an organization can move. So, practically speaking, when you made the judgment that you wanted to work on this project, what did it take internally? How did that affect the culture of the organization? And did you have to have an act of Congress internally to get this thing done, or did you have air cover? Give us a little bit of context for how. Because clearly talking to your fellow utility CIOs for a specific engineering project, had that been done before? Had you been working with the other utilities to create a specific engineering approach on other topics?
We do work together, certainly, but not to that extent at that point, certainly.
So getting that off the ground internally, just to get me, especially because we want to think about how this applies, what was it like and how did it work internally? Was it just, you're the new kid on the block, we want to give you a shot, or how did that work?
That was definitely part of it, and creating the compelling case for the customer and why we needed to do it was really eye-opening for people and hard to say no.
I obviously have a screenshot from literally, we hit the mark. I think on the 90th day,
yes,
we gathered, and we obviously hit the goal, and thank you for your team to execute. What was the launch like internally? Did it give people confidence that the organization could do this kind of thing? Did you break some china internally? Help us understand that the day you hit live on the service.
There was a lot of energy and excitement, and the cool thing is it wasn't just at PG&E, but it was at the other 2 large utilities in California. We all launched within the 90 days and collaborated together, and it became, the engineers working together across the companies to quickly make it happen. A lot of high fives.
And now we want to move into the next, the kind of the construct of the session and the whole purpose behind the philosophy. So you build, you measure, you learn. And clearly this was a prototype to get out this minimum capability, right? This is the simple feed that gives consumers the ability to have machine-readable access to just the basic usage data off the meter. But you took it another step. Help us understand this led, the sweat off the brow, we made a commitment to the White House, we did it, let's go back to our boring little lives. But no, you didn't go back to your boring little life. What did you do, and what are we looking at here behind us? What what was the next step in the philosophy of learning from customers? What would be useful? What are we looking at?
The whole point of creating a standard record format that was simple was so that we could leverage third parties across the country, not just in Silicon Valley, who was in our back door, to create apps to leverage that data where they can match it with weather or electric vehicle usage and other things like that. So we partnered with the Department of Energy, created a hackathon, and we had over 200 entries, some of them out of their garages, some of them like real companies, competing and creating some pretty cool apps like home energy analytics that tells you your vampire load, meaning things you have turned on that aren't being used but sucking up energy. And we've also taken it one more step where we now have Share My Data, which allows you, similar to if anybody uses Mint, one time you go in with any one of these third parties and you give them your 6-digit PIN, and then they can get your data. So a lot more commercial company software are leveraging it, like Gridium, to create solutions for large companies and their energy usage. I heard just last week that Facebook is getting in and using it as a tech-savvy company to create a dashboard on the usage of energy across their campuses. We have Stanford that's using it for a gamification app, and we have Marin Clean Energy, which is one of our community choice aggregators, and then they use it to create 200,000 agreements with all of their customers. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for third parties to take it and use their creative mind to take it even further for our customers.
I mean, that culturally, I gotta believe this is just a whole new muscle for the organization. I can't imagine if PG&E was asked the question, when's the PG&E App Store launching? I mean, was it on the roadmap?
No, but it is now.
So, and I think that the idea that you led the charge and this culture change has happened in the sector, clearly the fact that you chose an industry standard in theory means that the vendors who are working with you aren't building a PG&E product. They're building something that theoretically would work with others. Do you have a sense for the adoption
Correct.
of Share My Data? Give us a flavor for how this is going. What's the status?
Well, one thing we should mention also is that this did spread across the country and actually into Canada, across other utilities, 30 million customers across the US. And there are 20 legitimate users of Share My Data. So these are companies that then take that data and do things for their customers, and there are 40 more that are in the works, like Facebook, who are getting ready to launch with it.
So just to make sure we understand, from 90 days of just download a CSV or whatever you want to, was it like an Excel
we went
format?
field by field, remember that?
I
feel like
remember
I was
it
back
very
in
well.
my COBOL days.
Very right, field by field. To what you said was correct. 30 million people are with utilities that have volunteered. Now, did we pay you? Did I give you a big government contract for this project?
No.
Right. And so to wrap this, I wanted to get a little bit of where you go from here. So you've talked about this idea of a digital utility. I understand, and this is maybe the last section to wrap up, you're now participating in another industry collaborative.
With the Department of Energy, yes.
Tell us about this more recent iteration and frankly, connect the dots. I mean, is this now part of the culture of new product development or IT? I mean, or is it just serendipity that you're getting all these calls from the Department of Energy to do stuff? Give us the flavor.
I think there is an energy and an appetite for serving our customers and creating quick alliances. And this is the Sunshot Alliance that the Department of Energy launched in September, and they're actually challenging people. I don't know how many of you go to Home Depot, you see those solar guys trying to sell you solar there, but the actual process of getting solar set up is a manual paper permit process and a lot of other steps that you have to go through. So we are participating with cities of Livermore and Berkeley here and several other third parties that actually do permit processing to be part of the challenge to take that down. The average expectation today is 30 days, although it takes much longer than that. And the goal is to be under a day to make that happen. And we're taking the challenge on so that people can walk through Home Depot or whatever and sign up for it and have it set up within a day.
And I mean, unbelievably exciting initiative. Just to give you all a perspective, when we did a look at this to launch this project, the idea behind it was originated from a study Sunrun and Solar City and others had looked at.
Solar City, yes.
So they had studied and found that literally the permitting process was $1 billion drag on the installation economy. So effectively, society imposed $1 billion burden.
And I can share a tidbit on that. We actually have a little jump start on this because we've created an online thing, so we're down to 3 days already.
Woohoo!
Which took it from $100 to $30 per unit.
Can you believe that? We got to
So
write
that's
that up.
part of
That's
that
a great
drag.
case study.
Yes.
Wow, that's awesome. So this competition is going to last a little while longer.
It's through March of 2017.
But the goal basically is that you're going to get to that one. You might even get to that 1 day mark a lot
Right,
earlier.
and there is a prize, but it goes to the communities that participate, like
Yes.
$10 million, which is great for those communities.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much. Isn't that exciting, Karen? Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Leanne, you live in the world of talent. And give us a little bit of context of your journey. You've been thinking about human capital for many, many years before you joined Workday. Just tell us a bit of your journey to Workday, and then we'll dive into what led to the project we worked on.
Yeah, my purpose, I guess, in my career, and all of us think we have our own purpose, whether we articulate it out loud or not. But mine has always been to connect people with opportunity and doing it in small ways. And then as my career grew and different opportunities presented themselves, to do it in more significant ways with large enterprises. And so before I joined Workday, so my company makes cloud applications for large corporations for human capital management and financial management. But before I joined Workday, I was an industry analyst, which essentially just means I get to pontificate on what's going on in the talent economy and what kind of technology is there to enable and support it. So I spent a lot of time thinking and writing and speaking, and then had the opportunity to join Workday to actually start putting start doing something about it actually in practicality. So that's a little bit about my journey. It's passion. Workforce development initiatives have always been a passion, but get to do it on a slightly larger stage now, and then in walks Aneesh, and I get to do it on a much larger stage. So thank you for that opportunity.
So let's dive in. Behind us is a screenshot of the minimum viable product that was launched, essentially an R&D collaborative on testing this notion of helping veterans connect opportunity. Give us some context about the nature of the challenge as you dug into this, and what motivated your participation.
Well, one of the great opportunities that we have today is the best of modern technology and data to help us make better decisions, do better planning, just be more efficient in general. And again, in the context I operate in every day at Workday, that's something that we live and breathe and try to help our customers. And I, personal passion around it. And my founder, Dave Duffield of our organization, I think I've met Aneesh. I'm not sure how you met actually, but Dave just loves people and absolutely fell in love with Aneesh and said, "You need to meet this Aneesh guy. He's doing amazing work, and I think with what you care about, the two of you need to get together and do something." And he's just as eccentric and as crazy as that, to say, get together with somebody smart and figure something great out, and I'll help you with it. And that sounds ridiculous, but that's actually really how it happened. And so we sat down and we said, well, where are our shared energy and interest? And open data came up right away around open data. And my founder has a passion around veterans and returning service people and getting them a great opportunity in our economy and making that as efficient as possible. So we said, one of the biggest challenges that we have today facing us is a skills mismatch, where we have skills that are in need in the economy. Companies need to hire them, can't find the right skilled folks in the right location. It's a hyper-local, hyper-regional challenge. And it's even more acute with returning service people whose skills aren't easily translatable into sort of the commercial sector or into the normal job posting lexicon. And so that was a particularly important and specific challenge that we could address collectively, using Aneesh's wherewithal throughout government, and we had to get some data sets opened up, and his knowledge of the most modern contemporary technologies to help us just get through all of the analysis that we needed to, and then our desire and the team that kind of worked on it from our end to collaborate with other corporations, as well as just to build great applications to manifest this data in a way that people can use to make decisions. So.
And we're going to dive into the specifics of the capability that was launched, but just again, situational awareness. You've got a product's responsibility. Where on the roadmap prior to the discussion about this effort was the idea of, whether it be for veterans or otherwise, tackling it using this open data approach? Was it on the radar? Was this out of left field? What I'm trying to engage the discussion for the group is, for organizations that want to do cross-boundary collaboration, is this a one-off because of just unique circumstance? Or is there something here in the DNA that actually leads to, in the case of Karen describing, it's now DNA in PG, the rate of innovation, you just described it, is just unbelievable. Not that this was the reason for it alone, but it maybe was a catalytic role. Could you give us context?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, core to what we do is workforce planning, helping companies look at supply, demand, and make better decisions about their future. But what wasn't was accessing open data sources, government supplied open data sources. I mean, the best we had was BLS data, and it wasn't at a level of granularity or information that could really help any one company in specific use cases. So it was nowhere on the roadmap, really, because we just didn't have access to the right kind of information to do that programmatically through our product. So prior to this initiative, we didn't have sort of an open data mindset at Workday relative to public data.
But it's probably fair to say that you did have a lean startup, agile, build, measure, learn mindset. I don't want to, legacy, utility versus cloud, cool.
Yeah.
Just practically speaking, what was the...
Serving enterprises is no surprise. It takes a lot of capital and a lot of upfront investment that wouldn't qualify as lean in any way, shape, or form. But in terms of our software development, our agile methodology, we have a single code line and continuous development, customer feedback loop. We actually deliver to our customers every Friday. So it's much different than classic enterprise software. So I would say in the development ranks, in the software development, we very much are a lean organization. We do iterative development, get MVP out there and iterate with our customers. So, consistent with what you were describing earlier.
So it wasn't as much of a cultural leap to say, let's put some resources on how do we think about capability here, and then what we're going to get into in a moment is how you brought it back in. But it was really a different resource you could tap into, like a new oil field that you could tap for resource, this open data field.
So we saw a public good, no doubt, and an opportunity to collaborate with someone really fantastic. But what we also said is how can we then incorporate our learnings back into our product, and what assets of that would actually help us long term. So there was many benefits to this engagement, and they proved highly beneficial long term.
So let me take a minute on what the it was, just so we get everybody level set, and then we'll dive back into how it worked internally. But just to kind of, we got a map of this community. We had a supply and a demand dimension to the discussion. Do you want to say a word about how we thought about the supply or the demand, or I can fill in the gaps as you describe it?
So returning service people that are unemployed, they file unemployment claims at the state level. When they file their claims, they also have basic information about the skills that they've acquired during their time in the military, during time serving. But those definitions of those skills are nowhere near the kind of language we use when we do job postings, when corporations do job postings, trying to find talent in the marketplace. So there's a lot of people attacking the veterans, helping veterans get job problem set, and I think back to lean startup, when we started collaborating, we said, look, we don't want to build another job board. There's a proliferation of them. There's at least 30 by our count. But this still is a vexing problem. Why is this still such a challenge? And we determined that the challenge was really in the translation and the ability to really know at a regional, and why you see a geospatial representation here, but to really understand where are the unemployed veterans, what skills do they have, and what are companies trying to hire for in that locale, in that county, at the county level. To get that information. So a lot of things, I won't go into all the details, but a lot of things had to take place. Data had to be opened up at the state level. We had to parse through all the data, get it, read it, build taxonomies. We had a lot of partners, LinkedIn, Monster.com, Glassdoor, PayScale. A lot of companies kind of brought their talents and their assets to bear to make this proof of concept. So it was the art of the possible, actually production quality, but snapshot in time, where we actually mapped at a county level and in metro level, where were those unemployed veterans, what skills did they have, did we translate those skills to match them up with what companies were looking for at a job posting level, the real-time reality of the economy, which is job postings. And we did that to show what was possible when states did open up their data, and when we did apply big data technology visualization to illuminate problems. So we had a lot of policymakers, educators, community colleges, bloggers, people that care about the economy, just weigh in on this. And as part of our launch, they said, what did they learn from this data set? What changes could be made, whether it's at an educational institution level or a corporation? How could workforce planners to policymakers to educators actually help, and veterans use this to help them match better? So when they go to job boards, they know what they're looking for.
And I'll share one little vignette, and then I want to ask how it led to new thinking inside the organization. We zoomed in on a set of jobs that were posted in a community in Virginia. We looked at all the open job postings from employers who made a commitment to hire veterans, understood the aggregate skill profile of those jobs, and what it turned out was that tech jobs, about 27% of them were really entry-level hiring. That was what they were looking for. And the Corporate Executive Board, one of our collaborators, had studied what it would take to be tech trainable. In other words, what were the raw skills from we went April 2014, unemployed veterans who filed with the government for unemployment checks. We got the aggregate count of their, by skills, by zip code, or by county actually, for privacy reasons. And we mapped them against the skills profile. And the Corporate Executive Board, if I remember correctly, Leanne, literally every one of those entry-level tech jobs from employers who made a commitment to hire veterans could have filled all of those jobs with unemployed veterans who were filed for unemployment
Yes.
at that time, but their job title was something else, but their underlying skills were deemed tech trainable by this data science research effort. That kind of frustration is maybe emblematic of what we learned, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, many corporations, large ones in particular, kind of companies we serve have raised their hand and said, yes, I would like to hire veterans so long as they're skilled, right, for the jobs that I have, but have a hard time finding and meeting their veteran benchmark standards. So there's actually, if you're a government contractor, you have standards of what you have to hire to, and they have a hard time. But this project illuminated that we have a translation problem and we have a data insights problem, and with this kind of technology, we can close that gap. It's not a panacea, but it's certainly a fantastic way to use open data and big data.
So wrap it up in terms of where we're going from here, Leanne.
Yeah.
Where did this lead to further thinking and activity in the organization? Are you still collaborating with the public sector? Give us some perspective.
High level within Workday, obviously, so many of us became passionate about this problem set that, of course, things in our own product that we commercially sell, great veterans dashboard, ability to flag jobs that are vet-friendly for the corporations that work with us, all sorts of enhancements. We actually, at our company, developed a career accelerator program for veterans, and our product management function was sort of fighting for who gets to hire these veterans that just got trained up with us. So that's been nice on the Workday front. But Aneesh, during the collaboration, one of the things we discovered at the national level that our national skills database, or the close approximation to what that would look like, called ONET, was antiquated at best, or is antiquated at best. I'll kind of be nice. And that one of the problems we have is we don't have we don't have a way to actually describe the skills our economy needs in any kind of standardized format or any kind of even interpreted format. So we're all just winging it. Every company's winging it. Every job seeker's winging it to match the skills that they want with what take the veterans lens off to what companies want. And so right now there's a big workforce skills co-op initiative right now through the National Economic Council, and then many initiatives at the state level, and tech hire and involved in that. And so we're advising on what that would look like, what a new way to do this, an open data way where we're crowdsourcing, we're using, again, big data technology to actually illuminate the skills that are needed and build a taxonomy that's maintained as a data source, not getting government in the application development business, letting all of us build beautiful applications, not unlike the Green Button Initiative, where, so that is the ambition. The ambition is that industry innovates and government provides a rich data source that we can rely on, like the Weather Service, like the Green Button. So we are actively engaged, as many other companies in this collaboration are. So you just see this iterative development, this learning and passion building, and just customer feedback loop from all the different stakeholders. It's been really just a joy, a gift to be part of, and so much more to come. It's just fueled all of our excitement.
I think the two stories you're hearing, and I'll wrap with the healthcare piece, gives you this notion that it wasn't a natural act to think about a collaboration with the public sector,
Right.
but the water was warm when you stepped in. The pool wasn't scary, it wasn't filled with sharks, and that there was a method by which you could do this and not hit the wall of bureaucracy, but actually leverage these assets in a way that maybe other sectors might learn from.
But
That was
just
the
a
key.
compliment to you, Aneesh. I mean, you made that possible. I don't think, so I think there's definitely people that can pave the way, and Aneesh is certainly the leader that we need.
All too kind. That wasn't part of the
No,
script
I know
today.
it isn't,
But
but-
the logic here is that
Yeah.
this is not a one-off.
Yeah.
There's now an acknowledgement that this could be part of, at some level, the product feature set that could be built upon if there's greater
That it's not a
activity.
multi-year horizon, that you can get something done and measure it in months and not years.
Correct.
And that, for those of us who like to build product, and I think many of us do in the room, seeing the fruit of your labor soon is a really important motivator. So.
Thank you very much. We're going to think of your questions for the two of them. Why don't we take theirs, and then I'll end with healthcare so that we don't cover. You have a question for them?
Sure, yeah, I just wanted to ask.
Tell us who you are.
Probably Tim Booth.
Got the mic.
And,
We hear you.
Yeah, and
The recording.
so my question was,
I think it does help for the recording.
Okay, sorry about that.
sure, thanks so much. My question was just that when you think lean startup, you think, quick cycle times, turnaround, and not a lot of permission asking. You just kind of go ahead and do this stuff. When you're working with big data sets from the government that require a lot of bureaucracy, provisions, kind of process following, is that a struggle for you? I mean, how did you kind of get around it?
Excellent question.
Actually, as Aneesh shared, we had them right there in the room with us, with the other utilities, and it wasn't a struggle at all. They were actually very creative in the process to keep it simple, the MVP, and no issues at all, really. Actually more collaboration than
One
resistance.
friendly amendment. The agency she had to deal with is built by its DNA to be an industry collaboration agency. It's called the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Correct.
By law, it can't dictate like Moses, thou shalt do it this way. They're not allowed to by law. So it's a little bit of you got set up with an agency whose culture was this.
True.
The state regulator may not be in the same boat. I don't know what that may have been like, but I don't know how that part fit, but.
We had to work with the California Public Utility Commission, but as long as we were keeping customers' data private, there was not an issue.
Leanne, what's been like for you dealing with the Labor Department, the White House
Right now, I'm
Council?
dealing with the National Economic Council in an advisory capacity, and the woman who's running the Workforce Skills Co-op initiative, she called me last December and said, "Hey, I think one of the outcomes of the project," and Aneesh wrote a white paper for the Center for American Progress with some policy recommendations to revamp or to work on ONET 2.0, that national skills database that we were describing. And so she said, "Hey, we want to do this." And that was like a month or two later. We want to act upon that. And I thought it was kind of a prank call. And then about a month later, she said, "Hey, we got funding." So I've had a positive experience, and I think it's a lot of the players right now that are there and really excited about this initiative. So I haven't found it to be too onerous. I do think open data at the state level was probably our biggest challenge, but once we showed the art of the possible, so I do think MVP is important. I think MVP and not perfect. We were great, but not perfect. Getting that out there, showing people how we were going to use it, how we were going to anonymize, how we're going to keep it safe. It gave people something tangible to react to and respond to. So I would say that in dealings for public good initiatives, to get something to show them it's not scary, right?
Perfect answer. Yes, please.
Right.
Did the mic ever work when we say that? Go for it. Go ahead. We hear you.
Can you repeat the question?
I'll repeat the question. That's a great idea.
Yeah, so on the veterans project actually, so do you sort of have some data on the success of it, like how many veterans actually found jobs and are sort of using it or found it useful? So that's one question, and the second question on top of that is, as it happened in the utilities project, right? The original idea started somewhere, and now it has evolved into like this open ecosystem of innovation. Has that something also happened here on this project where it has led to like people taking the data and sort of saying, no, you could do these things which you probably didn't think of.
Yeah, excellent questions. Let me clarify one before I let Leanne answer. The question was, did this particular MVP result in jobs for veterans? And the second was, is there or will there be an ecosystem of entrepreneurs building off of this? To clarify, we did a snapshot for April 2014 as a retrospective, so it wasn't a real-time use it for today, but you can comment on that. But I want to clarify that to give folks a sense of it.
Right, yeah, so we were showing the art of the possible to help get the states to open up their data sets for that. And this tool is designed for policymakers and educators, not necessarily for veterans themselves finding a job, although there's value to that. And what as part of the art of the possible, we had a number of contributors say how they would use the data and what did they learn. So CEB being one, media being another. So if you go to the site, it's veteranstalent.io, you can see what people learned. And so then it's just prompted different states to open up data sets, as well as this initiative right now, and again, acting upon one of Aneesh's policy recommendations, to really revamp our national skills database, to make a project like this not an artisan level exercise, which is what we did. It was with Hunch Analytics and LinkedIn and other firms. It was high art, and we want to make this programmatic and something sustainable long term. In order to do that, we have to have a better handle on our national skills. Yeah.
Great. Let me do the healthcare piece so that we can let you guys rock and roll for those that want to. I saw hands are itching healthcare in the first place. So let me thank you both for that feedback and stick around for these questions. On healthcare, we in the Recovery Act were front-loading about $30 billion of investment to digitize what was previously in the manila folders for doctors and hospitals. When the president was elected and we were on the transition team preparing for the first term, we understood that we were trying to both digitize the system, but to not ossify the technology capability circa 2007 and 8, but to usher in new capability yet to be built that could be built on top, in the same way you saw the apps ecosystem emerge as Karen's described it. This was a tall order, and we faced the conundrum that we couldn't solve it all. We couldn't rip the Band-Aid off with a big, Moses tablets to say this is how the future architecture of 17% of the GDP should look. So we thought about a 3-stage process, and it's this last stage that we're in right now where the MVP I'll describe fits. Context. The first point was that we wanted to take a little bit of an understanding as to the data model you would need to care for someone in the model envisioned for the president's healthcare reform bill. The bill hadn't been signed, but we thought, for example, wouldn't it be nice if I could monitor my smoking patients to figure out, are they on smoking cessation programs? How successful are they? Well, to give you an example, one of our advisors at the time was the CIO at Partners Healthcare, the Mass General, the Brigham, two of the most powerful and prominent academic institutions, the bleeding edge of clinical research. They had no technical capacity to find out whether they had a patient who was a smoker or not. Smoking was never in the data model. Smoking status, I should say. Your blood pressure, your core vital signs, basic information about the patient's condition, the medications that they're on, the encounters that they've had, the capability of just what you would think of as a minimum viable consumer patient sort of data model. So our first goal was to ensure that as many of those fields could be captured digitally as possible. So we basically subsidized in the first phase, go from manila to digital, and at a minimum, the digital that you adopt should have the capacity to store the blood pressure in a certain way, the smoking status and the like. Well, each system had its own way of codifying each of those things. That didn't necessarily mean that those could be shared with each other. So in the second stage, we wanted to open up the respective kimonos across each of these organizations. Problem was, the unit of connectivity was a document. They took the manila folder and thought of it as like one big PDF. That's not exactly true, but I'm trying to draw the metaphor. And shipped these like 50-page documents to be the patient summary file. Hard for an app developer to build apps on a 50-page summary document that had to be parsed with consistency and accuracy. So we allowed for the exchange of that data. You could basically securely email that summary file from anyone in the system. You could do that today. You could, and millions of emails are flying around the country so that, if you wanted to, you could download your record, you could email it to someone. That's been around. But to get to the share my data that Karen described, we needed to take it to the level of the internet economy. We needed to have RESTful APIs, and we needed to be able to pull discrete pieces of data, not these big lumberjack documents. The president said it in January. I want to have, and I'll paraphrase his language, I want to ensure that consumers have access to their own health data, and for the first time the president uttered these words, and to the applications and services that can safely and accurately analyze them. So, for the first time, our final stage of meaningful use was to incorporate the notion that the consumer would have the right to share their data with whomever they want. As this initiative took off, the private sector was facing an opportunity to collaborate in establishing those standards. So again, rather than having a Moses-like figure show up with thou shalt do APIs this way from the government, wouldn't it be nice if the industry could collaborate on its own with air cover and collaboration from the public sector? So the administration had published a recommendation. It was called the Jason report. It said we need to have an open API. It wouldn't be vendor A has one API, vendor B has another API. They can have all their proprietary APIs for all the things that they do in their systems, but there should be a minimum patient data set. The labs, the meds, the problem list, the encounter summary, the care team. 16 pieces of data should be the same no matter which vendor was the home of that original data set. So the private sector had to agree that while they would have their proprietary APIs, they'd have a common API for that minimum patient data set. So I take no credit for the name. The Jason report led to the Argonaut project. And the Argonaut project at argonautproject.org essentially became our MVP, which was an open, it's still to this day, an open testing regime so that any app developer can hit dummy data on the Epic Fire server, on the Athena Fire server, on the Cerner Fire server. A dozen private sector electronic health records companies have published dummy data for free in the open source. You can plug and play, and here's an example. Entrepreneurs are building API layers. So we basically married a RESTful API called Fire with the OAuth protocol, OAuth 2 for security, and combine them to deliver a capability that allows you to do this. This is Duke University Health System. It's the first health system to go into production with these smart on fire applications. These are applications that have been tested in this Argonaut project, and the testing is still underway. It's not done. But to give you a flavor, if you're a pediatrician at Duke and you want to present your patients, the babies, blood pressure or growth chart or whatever in a more visually stimulating way, you can substitute the native version of the growth chart that comes with the vendor that is at Duke with this built by the Boston Children's Research team. And this substitutable application is the first of its kind in production. I encourage all of you to visit the argonautproject.org, just argonautproject.org. If you have an app, test your app against the specs. To conclude where this public-private collaboration has gone, while the president had this call to action and the industry responded, about a month ago, the regulators officially declared that this capability, providing that minimum patient summary data via APIs, is now in the final rule for the Meaningful Use Program. It will be ubiquitous by 2018, but people can be adopting it as early as this coming year. And so keep your eye out if you're interested in these FHIR-enabled apps. as it's now on the roadmap for the organizations. That's where we are for these 3 projects. What I'd love to do now is take any final questions or suggestions you might have for the panel, and then mingle as needed. Any other questions or concerns? We'll start with you, sir, then we'll come back to you. Yes.
So I'm Justin Souter. I come from the UK.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pleased to be here. So how transportable are the use cases to take them back to the UK, please? Can you repeat
Leanne,
that?
you have customers in the UK. So the question is, how international are these? Obviously, these are US use cases from the US government instigation, but how translatable and referenceable are they across the globe?
Yeah, I think one of the exercises we're going through now is to just develop a schema for when you do a job posting, where are the skills, and I think the UK is actually ahead of the US in adopting this standard, so that the search engines can actually pick up and find out exactly where the skills are, so they can start to catalog and inventory and build a taxonomy of the skills that are needed for the UK. So the UK is actually a bit ahead here and has taken a lot of cues from some of the groundwork that we've been doing. Yeah, so it's lovely. And then of course the kind of companies that my company serves are multinationals with significant presence and domiciled, headquartered in the UK as well. So they would benefit from the invisible ink, as Aneesh likes to call it, on the back of the job posting, regardless of which search engine and which government agencies are picking them up. In addition, we are working at the European Commission level on some of these ideas too, because this problem, this challenge of skills mismatch is across the globe, right? It's not just in the US.
And Karen, you mentioned the Canadians are following suit. Any other feedback on how is
London,
the standard transferable?
Absolutely. London Hydro in Ontario is using it, and really any utility across the world who's deploying smart meters, if they create it in the standard record format that we've defined, which is pretty simple, they could leverage all of the talent that's out there developing apps.
So the very interesting point is the supply chain of smart meter companies that have their own method of presenting this data to you, you transform it and then expose it in a common way. And it's worked across many vendors. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have 20 that are up and 40 in the works. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Other questions? Go back to that. Yes, sir.
So I forgot. My name is Ankur, and I work in the Bay Area. The question I had was, like, in Lean Startup, they talk a lot more about doing the MVP and taking your original idea and experimenting, and then you sort of learn and you sort of a lot of times they find that you have to change and evolve into something different from where you originally started with. In both the projects, did you had that moments where you started with something and you sort of changed into, like, your assumptions changed and your idea evolved?
We definitely had that with the green button, because when we initially launched, we didn't have the share my data portion. So for customers to give these third parties access to their data, it was paying for them to go into the online system and download a file and then upload it to their website. So we said we need to create share my data, which is the next iteration that we talked about. So making it as easy, and now we're getting ready to deploy some SDKs for people to easily do that OAuth capability with energy data.
Nice. I didn't know that. Well done. You go, girl.
And similar, we took wireframes out and did design thinking work, so it wasn't, again, we ultimately ended up in an art of the possible prototype, but we did a lot of customer feedback in order to, we were going down a path of more job matching, and it took a turn into more of an analytics play, pure analytics play.
Any final questions, and then we can mingle? You had a question, Ken?
Yes, actually, there's a question for Karen. Do you run into any security issues as far as creating open APIs around energy usage?
The question was, what's the security implication of an open API for utility data? An important question.
We definitely had to partner with the California Public Utility Commission and create the standard O authorization for sharing that data. So, and that had to be certified and definitely part of the case.
By the way, the great thing about this, now that you've said that, is the OAuth certified approach for the share by data will have relevance to the healthcare OAuth approach. And the third leg of the stool that's not on the stage would be the university HR systems, which, by the way, you have as well. That's a separate product at Workday, where that too is going to be the issue, that the consumer, the patient, the student can share that record data with guidance counselor app or whatever. So that's, in fact, another contribution to the cause. you want to comment on that, or on security?
Just the intersection of an open profile concept, which is not there yet, just to be clear, and the skills, mapping of the skills, it's not lost on us as well. So the OAuth of the open, the portability of that information and the identification of skills is something that I think this is where these roads all meet very soon. Yeah.
Thank you for Karen and Leanne for their contributions today.